Hello, welcome back. We're going to look at one of our intro level videos today. We're going to do one of our intro level videos today, and this one is entitled, Why Does Banking Matter? Or Why Do Banks Matter? Now, just think about what we do during the day as individuals or indeed as corporations. We undertake commerce. At the individual level, we'll buy goods and services, the weekly shop, we pay the rent, we may go on a holiday, we may decide to purchase some consumer good or indeed a higher value consumer good, a luxury car, a watch, or indeed even a non-luxury car, a simple runaround. Every day, human beings in the global economy are undertaking commerce, commercial activity, and that commercial activity isn't always funded by our own funds. In other words, we don't always have readily to hand the funds we need to undertake the commerce that we would wish to undertake. I mentioned things like buying consumer goods or buying a car or buying a house or going on holiday or indeed a myriad other things that individuals in every country undertake. When one doesn't have funds in place to undertake any type of commercial activity, a bank is where one may choose to go to obtain funds on the promise that one will repay them when one is able to, within the terms of the loan. And much economic activity would be curtailed, resulting in a much slower growth of economic development if there weren't banks available to provide this funding to people who want to undertake commercial activity but don't have the funds in place to do it right now. This enables commercial activity to take place sooner than it otherwise would. Now, some of these things that I mentioned could be very urgent things like doing the weekly shop or paying the monthly rent. And some of them will be longer term activities that will benefit us in some way. Let's say we want to set up a business. We want to set up our own small business. We want to take part in some business activity that requires an investment. We may choose to borrow those funds if we don't have them to hand today. Why would we do that? Because the business activity that we're undertaking will enable us to generate revenue for ourselves and we can repay the loan. So banking is important because it enables commercial activity, which if it didn't take place would result in a much slower rate of economic growth. We wouldn't have what we see around us. Here I am in Canary Wharf, in One Canada Square, Canary Wharf, and I look around me and I see a thriving metropolis, to use the line from, is that Batman? No. And I see lots of economic activity down below. I see the light railway, I see cars on a busy road, I see warehouses, I see economic activity being undertaken. And much of that wouldn't be in place or wouldn't have got started in the time it did if the business of getting that activity underway wasn't being funded by a bank loan. Okay, so that is why, on one hand, banks matter, banking matters, because it enables economic growth. There is, of course, the other side of the coin as well. Some individuals and corporations and governments, although it's much less rare, it's much more rare for governments to be in this place, some individuals and corporations have more money than they need to deploy at any one time. In other words, they have savings. They have surplus cash, so they want to park that somewhere, earning interest until they need to use it or they wish to use it. Again, that's where a bank comes in. They can deposit that cash with a bank and earn interest on that cash, and it's a safe, secure store for them, for their surplus cash, until they need it. Banks also enable a savings habit. I mentioned about taking out a loan to buy a house, a mortgage, a residential mortgage. When a bank makes a residential mortgage loan, the house that's being purchased by the home buyer is itself put up as security, as collateral on the loan. So if the mortgage borrower is unable to maintain the repayments on the mortgage, the bank will ultimately will have recourse to acquire that house so they can recover their loan amounts. Now, it's very uncommon, although not unknown, for a bank to offer a mortgage to the full value of the purchase price, 100% loan to value loan. But that's a minority of mortgage transactions in any country in the world. Generally, banks require the home buyer to put up some of their own cash as a deposit. Think of that as their equity stake in the house purchase. So let's say you've got a house that's or a home or a flat that's worth 100,000. no currency being stated here, 100,000, the bank might say, well, our minimum deposit requirement is 20%. So you would have to have 20,000 of your own cash and then borrow the remaining 80,000. Now that 20,000 itself has to be saved up. So banks enable a savings habit to be generated because you could be putting aside a part of your monthly income, for example, or your monthly revenue in the bank over time, saving up that deposit. And when it gets to that 20,000, you're able to purchase your house. Banking matters. Banks matter because they enable economic activity. They enable economic growth. They enable people to own their own home. They enable people to go out and purchase a car that they may need to travel to work or some such or other activity sooner than they might otherwise had if they couldn't afford the car on day one. They enable people to tide over short-term cash flow requirements, either with an overdraft or a credit card, until they get cash in hand again to enable them to repay that short-term loan. Banking matters because it enables economic growth. It enables people to take greater control of their own economic development, their own personal development. So, and one thing I should have mentioned was perhaps a student loan. That comes in handy if one wants to study further and higher education. Banking matters for all these reasons, and I always used to think it was a honourable profession to enter into. That view has been muddied somewhat by observing the events of 2008 and 2023, when banks contrived to crash themselves into the ground. But nonetheless, it's an important economic activity. It's an important sector of the global economy, and therefore a worthy consideration for your professional career. Thanks, and thanks for watching. See you soon. Bye-bye.